Sup VC, Bobby B here. It's good to see you. I know it's been a minute, and what can I say? It's just yeah, I've been busy, but then also just motivating yourself or motivating myself to do these videos. I don't know. The motivation wasn't there, still isn't in many ways, but I am excited to share this, and this video could make up for lost time because it has the potential to be pretty epic. What I'm going to do is, if you follow me on the Vinyl Vagabond Instagram page, I still listen to a lot of music. I still write about music quite a bit, and I usually do year-end countdowns. I just recently posted my top 30 records of 2019. And so that's a pretty interesting read. But before I post anything there, I thought I'd do a video sharing with you my top 30 albums of the decade, 2010 to 2019. This is a lot of fun to compile. Me and a couple of friends challenged each other to do it, and our three lists turned out totally different than each other. So there's a lot of great music to have come out this decade. Let me drink my coffee. Yeah, a lot of great music to come out this decade. And so these are just some of my choices. And 30 albums in a video, this'll probably be pretty long. We'll see if I could do it in half an hour, but anyways, wouldn't get my hopes up. But we'll see what we can do, especially since I'm going to throw out a few honorable mentions first before we start on the actual countdown. And these are all albums that came out in 2019. And although I do have two 2019 albums on the top 30 of the decade list itself, for the most part, 2019 was left off just because most of these albums I've only gotten to know over the last few months, and I don't really know what kind of staying power they will have. So these are all ones that could potentially, if I revisited this list in another 4 or 5 years, these are all albums that could potentially be there. But I just thought I'd share with you. One of them is a singer I've mentioned to you before, from Australia, Hatchie. She released an EP, I think it was a couple years ago, that was outstanding. Very Cocteau Twins, with a bit more of a pop vibe to it, and the EP was perfect. And then she released 3 singles from this album as well that were also perfect, so I was really anticipating this album. As can be expected, perfection doesn't last forever, so it didn't quite jump out of the gate just as much, but with repeat listenings, it still made my top 10 for the year, so who knows what more repeat listenings would do. So that's Hatchie. Saw her twice in concert this year. She signed my record. Yeah, amazing. Another great pick from this year is this girl here, Angel Olsen. This is, I think, her 4th or 5th album. It's entitled All Mirrors. She received a lot of buzz a few years ago for an album called My Woman, which was really, really good. Her voice is awesome. It's an amazing, unique, and powerful voice, but that album, I liked a lot of the songs, but nothing really punched me in the gut. She gets a lot more epic on this one, kind of an orchestral, dramatic album. The other albums were a little more kind of song-based, almost kind of folk or country-ish. But this album here, it's epic. It's, and I don't like to throw that word around a lot, but anyways, really like that. So that also made my top 10 this year, along with this one, Sandro Perry. I've mentioned him before, and we'll be getting to him later as well. Local Toronto genius. He released an album this year called Soft Landing. It's very, very mellow, song-based, guitar-oriented, almost bordering on yacht rock, which isn't a bad thing. The first song is about 18 minutes long, though. Time, You Got Me, and it's a great album as well. Very atmospheric, almost ambient in parts, but this one's a little more guitar-based than the one I'll be talking about later. Another great album, I don't have it on vinyl, but it also made my top 5 this year, was it's by a jazz artist, a jazz horn player, Muriel Grossman. The album is called Revidence. I highly recommend that one. Diana mentions it on her channel, so if you get a chance to hear that, but I don't have that one on vinyl. And this one here too, L'Épée is the name of the band. The album is Diabolique. As you can tell, it's rooted in French psych. I mean, a lot of it is in English actually, but it does have a real 60s French new wave sound. It's Anton Newcombe from the Brian Jonestown Massacre, along with Emmanuelle, I forget her name right now, but she's a model and an actress. She was in the movie Frantic with Harrison Ford, if you remember that movie in the, I guess it was probably in the late 80s. Oh yes, Emmanuel Signer. Anyways, really good psychedelic French pop music. It was my number 3 album of the year. My top 2 albums of 2019 are going to be on my list of the best of the decade, so we'll get to that right now. So now we'll go through my top 30 albums of the decade. And just gonna pull something up here quickly so that I can keep track of the numbers, because I know I'm gonna mess that up, and I just want to be able to kind of look at this here. Okay, so number 30 is an American band called Merchandise, and this was their album After the End. It's their 3rd album, and I don't know much about them before, and I know they've released at least one other album after this that I don't know too much about either, but I understand this one sort of alienated some fans when it came out, because they were I think they were kind of like a hardcore sort of punk band before, and this is not that at all. This is very, very melodic, almost new wave, kind of synthy music. Very, very catchy, very fun. I kind of had, if you ever saw the movie High Fidelity, I sort of had Beta Band 3 EPs experience with this, because it was playing at the record store as I was browsing, and they played it a couple times. I spent a whole afternoon at the record store. And by the time I was done there, I was like, what are we listening to? I gotta have this. I don't even know if I asked them or if I just kind of, got the phone and, what do you call it? Shazammed it and kind of, Merchandise, After the End. Synthy, new wave, pop music, very, very catchy. This is on 4AD, limited edition green vinyl. I'm not gonna show it to you, but that's number 30. Number 29 is probably the most divisive album on my list. It's by an artist many people love and respect, but this album didn't get a lot of love, and it's Jack White. It's his 3rd solo album entitled Boarding House Reach. And, I'm a fan of the White Stripes. I'm a fan of Jack White, but as many people are, but then my fandom kind of veers in a different direction than a lot of people, I think. This album, he gets weird. He gets very experimental. Kind of dabbles in electronica and things like that. There's kind of spoken word moments and stuff. So this was a tough one for fans of Jack White to digest, and because of that, it didn't get a lot of love. It's kind of like, this is sort of the last Jedi of Jack White albums. It's the one that some really loved and think it's the best, and then others were like, what the heck is he doing? I think it's his best solo album by far. Like, I liked his last 2 albums, but not on the level of this. And it's my 29 album of the year. Number 28 is an album I could see rising a lot higher as time goes on, because it came out this year, 2019. It was my number 2 album of the year, and it is Wise Blood, Titanic Rising. And she's just got this hauntingly beautiful voice. This was a bit of a grower. The first couple times I listened to it, I was kind of like thinking this was like, the Carpenters or something, but the melodies are so strong, and it does grow on you. I saw her in concert and just fell in love. It's an outstanding album. It just gets better the more I listen to it. It is currently my number 28 album of the decade, but I could easily see it climbing and getting higher. It's one I keep returning to over and over again. Number 27 came out, I want to say maybe 3 years ago. And it's again, I don't use this word often, but I'm using it again. It is an epic album. It is the final album by this band, The Knife, called Shaking the Habitual. These guys are an experimental, odd experimental electronic band, progressive electronic. This album is, it's a 3 record set, and it requires a lot of patience. Her voice, the singer's voice, who I'm not even going to pretend to pronounce, is Karin She she often kind of sings through these weird equipment. She does what she can to kind of mask her voice. In fact, she does that with her appearance too. When the rare time that she's made a public appearance at an award show or something, her face is always covered. Anyways, this is really great. It's dancey. It's kind of a, I don't know, dance music, I guess, but it's experimental dance music. Let's call it that. Experimental dance music. The knife shaking the habitual. Let me put this back in the thing. It is so gigantic. It's like really hard to put back in the wrap here. Great. My number 26 album is the only one I actually have on CD instead of vinyl. I don't know why, but it's the Arcade Fire's third album, The Suburbs. Arcade Fire, of course, a lot of people are familiar with them. They were a band that just kind of seemed to come out of nowhere, a Canadian band that just seemed to come out of nowhere, and their album Funeral, their debut album Funeral, is on many people's list of the best albums of all time. Certainly, it topped probably more lists than any for being the best album of the decade, or of last decade, anyways. I always liked Arcade Fire. I love Arcade Fire. In fact, these first three albums, and but not at the same level of worship as some people. But this is actually my favorite. I like this better than their debut. It kind of, it's got that large sort of group sound that the Arcade Fire always has, but this kind of, it does get a bit new wavy in parts. I don't know how, like, you could definitely hear bits of Talking Heads. You can hear bits of Bruce Springsteen kind of mashed together, David Bowie. But anyways, my 26th album, The Suburbs, Arcade Fire. Awesome album. All right, at number 25, it's a singer-songwriter from Australia, Courtney Barnett. This was her debut full length. It's entitled Sometimes I Sit and Think, and Sometimes I Just Sit. And just whimsical, witty lyricism. Her EP, or two EPs that she released prior to this, had a song called Avant Gardener, which may just be my song of the decade. But this also kind of carries on in that trajectory. So, singer-songwriter Courtney Barnett, Sometimes I Sit and Think, and Sometimes I Just Sit. Number 25 is number 24 is probably the most, I'm going to drink some coffee. Number 24 is probably the most obscure one on the list. It's the debut album by this band, Vanishing Twin, and it's entitled Choose Your Own Adventure. They released an album this year, which was also quite good, and it was released on Rough Trade. So they were signed to I don't think you'd call it a major label, but anyways, a label people have heard of, and that album has received a bit of positive press. You'd be hard pressed to find anything about this one, because this one kind of slipped under the radar. I don't remember how I came across it, but when I did, it blew me away. And so this is a completely independent release. I had to purchase this online. Choose Your Own Adventure. Dream pop, psych pop, experimental, some very strong instrumentation and kind of slightly soothing yet off-kilter vocals. I really recommend searching this one out if you're into that kind of dream pop, psych pop, maybe even slightly progressive sound. Drawing on sounds outside of the usual pop vocabulary, Vanishing Twin used forgotten drum machines, homemade electronics, vibraphones, tablas, and harp to invoke the esoteric psychedelia of lost soundtracks. I don't know why I just try and say things off the cuff when I could just read descriptions like that. That's accurate. So there you go. Vanishing Twin at number 24. Number 23 is a great band here. They are called Ice Age, and I'm trying to remember where they're from. I believe, Danish. They're a Danish punk rock band. And this is their album Plowing into the Field of Love. I don't know if punk rock is accurate, actually. I wouldn't call them punk rock. Definitely alt rock in many ways. But yeah, he's got this this really good kind of loud, but sort of lazy vocalism. Like, he doesn't take any time to pronounce his words properly. But very highly energetic kind of, I would almost call it post-punk before I'd call it punk, but Plowing into the Field of Love, Ice Age. You should give those guys a listen if you get the chance. That's number 23. Number 22 appeared on a lot of lists, and he's quite well known around here. Canadian artist Destroyer. Dan Bahar is his name. He goes under the name Destroyer. He's released many albums. He's also in the band. He's in the New Pornographers. And yeah, words. Anyways, yeah, Destroyer, and this is the album Kaput. And this one is, it's an adventurous release by him. It culminates in a song called Bay of Pigs, which is about 20 minutes long. The lyrics are very stream of consciousness, kind of like my reviews here. Stream of consciousness. You're not really sure what he's talking about, but they're still very poetic in their own way. Side 1 and 2. So that's side 4. Side 1 and 2 are composed of kind of shorter songs, and then side 3 he lends things over, and this is only available on the album, but he lends things over to Ted Bois, who's an instrumentalist on the album, and it's basically an ambient piece on side 3 that kind of falls out of place to the rest of the album, but I still really like it anyways. That's my Destroyer's Kaput. Kaput is my number 22 album of the year. Where are we here? Number 21 comes to us, I believe, from Sweden. Electronic artist M83, and this is the album Hurry Up, We're Dreaming. M83, his first few albums were a little bit more kind of ambient and electronic in tone. By his third album, I think it was his third album, anyways, it was the album right before this, he started kind of delving into an 80s sort of almost John Hughes movie soundtrack sort of way of thinking, and this kind of combines the two. I mean, you definitely have songs like Midnight City and Reunion, which are they would not be out of place on the soundtrack of a John Hughes movie in the 80s, but then you get other very kind of experimental some of the songs are instrumental, some of them have lyrics, but they're still kind of ambient in tone and electronic in tone. M83, Hurry Up, We're Dreaming. Excellent, excellent record. The song Reunion would also kind of be in the running for one of my favorite songs of the decade as well. That's at number 21. Another album from this year that I would highly recommend is Tom York's third solo album. It's entitled Anima. It's the one where he kind of finally gets it right in terms of his solo albums go. I've liked the other two, but Anima is outstanding. It made my top 10. Another one of his side projects, though, was this, Atoms for Peace. And this is the album, it's titled Amok. It also features Flea on bass. Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Not my favorite band in the world, but yeah, he's on bass, and Joey Waronker on drums, and Nigel Godrich on production and programming. I love this record. I think a lot of people loved it at the time, and then it's kind of gone forgotten since then, and I don't know why, because it is amazing. Look at that artwork. Beautiful, beautiful artwork. Very, it's also got the textured cover. Yeah, so this is, if you like Radiohead, there's definite similarities, especially to their kind of later, more electronic-based stuff, and this has a lot of, it is, I would call it an electronic album, even though it does have very, standard instruments in it, but it's still kind of an electronic album. But Amok, Atoms for Peace. I am not going to put that thing back in the bag for now because that takes a lot of work because it's thick. That album is thick, yo. Number 19, it was my number one album of the year. Of this year, of 2019. Jazz, The Comet is Coming is the name of the album. Trust in the Life Force of the Deep Mystery. It's, I think the band is from the UK, and it's jazz, but it's jazz with touches of electronica and funk and prog and even, you know, I even hear sort of smatterings of hip hop in there, especially in the what song is it? I think it's the third song on the record. Yeah, Blood of the Past. It features Kate Tempest on vocals. Yeah, it's a really, really experimental album, but not at all alienating in any way. I find it very, very easy to like. I liked it the first time I listened to it, and it just kept getting better with every listen. I purchased this a little while ago, and I went to the record store recently, and I noticed they had a lot of copies of this kicking around for, you know, $12 or something. So I don't know. I don't know what people are thinking, man. I don't know what people are thinking, but this is an outstanding album. The Comet is Coming. Trust in the Life Force of the Deep Mystery. Number 19. Wow, we were talking about Radiohead just a few minutes ago. This ain't gonna surprise anybody, but at number 18, A Moon-Shaped Pool. Radiohead, a lot of people talk about it being Radiohead's return to form. Come on. They never left. They never left form. They released the King of Limbs album earlier this year. That could have easily made this list too. I mean, a lot of people kind of talk about it as if it's some sort of disappointment. It ain't a disappointment. It's awesome. It's, you know what? Some albums are going to be better than others, but I mean, like, give me a break. If Radiohead only ever released the King of Limbs album, you know, they'd be like the Sex Pistols. They'd be legendary for releasing that one amazing album. But anyways, we're not talking about that. We're talking about A Moon-Shaped Pool. Very, very strong. Some of these songs had already been part of their live repertoire for years, and people were wondering when they were going to get an official release, so it's on here. But, you know, it's Radiohead. What can I say? Epic. I never use the word epic, except 8,000 times in this video. Radiohead, Moon-Shaped Pool, at number, from 2016. And it is at number 18. All right. Number 16 is an album that came out, I believe, in 2017. Throwing numbers at you. Throwing numbers at you. That's what I do. Japanese Breakfast. Soft sounds from another planet. I don't know what kind of music this is. Indie rock. It's pretty straightforward. Pretty straightforward indie rock, I guess. But yeah, there's something about her style, something about her voice, and something about the melodies that just get me right in the heart grapes. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I saw her live. I think it was probably back in 2017 when I saw her. She signed my record. Have I talked about this one on here before? I might have. Beautiful, beautiful record. Japanese Breakfast, soft sounds from another planet. Good. Number 16 is by a psych rock band that released 3,623 albums this year. You know, and 15,000 of them were released in 1 year. But so when it comes to King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, it's hard to choose, you know, which one makes the list. They kind of start canceling each other out because there's so many. But I think this release from 2016 for me is kind of yeah, it's the best one. Obviously, it's the one that made my list. It's called Nonagon Infinity, and technically speaking, it is the longest song ever recorded because the album starts with the song "Robot Stop," and it kind of fades in, right? And then the album ends, I think the last song's called Invisible Face, if I'm not mistaken. And no, it's not. It's called Road Train. Yeah, the last song's called Road Train, and it concludes by fading out. But it concludes the same way the album opens, with the same Nonagon Infinity, open the door, Nonagon Infinity, open the door. and it sounds exactly like that, and yet it is still my number 16 favorite album of the year. Anyways, super awesome psychedelic rock music, if you will. A little bit hyperactive. They released two great albums this year too. They released "Fishing for Fishies," which was a boogie-based album, and then they released "Infest the Rat's Nest," which was thrash metal. And yeah, it was it was thrash metal. It was great. If that's your thing. Number 15 is came out earlier this year. I think it came out in 2010 actually, and it was the last album by LCD Sound System until they and then they broke up, and then they reunited 3 seconds later and released another album. But this is the one I like, LCD Sound System. Yeah, dance music, kind of, I guess, kind of touches on the rave culture, although it's not super electronic or anything like that, but I would call it maybe Britpop meets dance music, although are they British? I think they are, can't remember. I'm almost, like, I sound like a moron because I am almost 100% certain they are from, nope, they're American, they're from New York. I'm the biggest phony in the music business. in a business where people are all so completely genuine, I am the only phony in rock and roll today. LCD Sound System. This is happening. That's my number 15 album. Number 14 was the third album by a girl I love, Joanna Newsom. Have One on Me. It was a 3-record set. That incidentally, being 3 records, I think the only word to describe this would be epic. And Joanna Newsom, I loved her first 2 albums. Her second album, Yes, YS, is just one of the greatest albums ever. But she has this inflection in her voice where it's kind of like Kate Bush on helium. Like she had this squeaky quality in her voice that the people that didn't like it really didn't like it. And I think that was kind of off-putting for people. She tones that down quite a bit on this album, and I think in that way made it a little bit easier to swallow for some. But just amazing. It requires a bit of patience. It is quite long, but Have One on Me, Joanna Newsom, unbelievable album. That's my number 14. Number 13 is one of my favorite bands. I'm going to say they've become one of my favorite bands of all time because, the early 2000s, they've released some of my favorite records ever. They've broken up a few times and gotten back together. This is their album. It's Broken Social Scene, Hug of Thunder. And this is, while it's not their best album, I wouldn't call it that, because their album You Forgot It in People is one of the greatest albums of all time. But I would say that this is their most consistent record from start to finish. There is not a single dud song on here. So in that sense, now it maybe doesn't have the songs as euphoric as some of the ones that came on other albums prior, but just in terms of consistency, yeah, there isn't a bad song on here. And you've got so many, you've got Feist as part of it. Feist is in this band. Jason Collette, Amy Milan, what's her face? Emily Haynes from Metric, the Apostle of Hustle. Like, if you know all of these other artists, they all come together right now over this album. Halfway Home. Or that's the name of the song. The song is called Halfway Home, which is unbelievable. The album is called Hug of Thunder, and that's exactly what it feels like. It feels like a warm but powerful hug of thunder. Number 12 is an album by a band that overall I think is quite overrated. But this album, they got it right. Fleet Foxes is the name of the band. Their debut album was released to tremendous praise. That's their self-titled debut album. The harmonies are transcendent. Their harmonies are out of this world. And with their first album, I think the harmonies may have distracted. Anyways, in my mind, being a snob, I think it may have distracted some people from the fact that the songs in themselves were still kind of boring. Just, you know, the harmonies were outstanding. This one, the songs are excellent, and this blew me away. It took me a while to listen to it because everybody was going on about it. And I was like, yeah, everybody went on about the last album, and it wasn't that great. But then I listened to this, and it's awesome. It's awesome. The title track, Helplessness Blues, I think would fall into one of my favorite songs of the decade as well. So, you know, indie folk, but this album gets quite a bit experimental as well. So it's folk music, but yeah, I think if you like, you know, like Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, but if they released kind of an album where they were tinkering into progressive rock a bit, don't get me wrong, this doesn't sound like Yes or anything like that, but you know, it's definitely progressive in style, if not so much in sound. But anyways, Fleet Foxes, Helplessness Blues. Speaking of progressive, at number 11, this is another artist that I would describe her as progressive, at least in her style. Julia Holter is her name. This is her album, Have You in My Wilderness. And, you know, there was a time when artists like Kate Bush and Grace Jones and Laurie Anderson would be experimental and still be accessible. And then somewhere along the line, people said, no, if you're experimental, you're not accessible anymore. And I think that's ludicrous. That's how I would describe this album. Pardon me. It's certainly experimental, but but I think anybody can like this album. Julia Holter, Have You in My Wilderness. Now this album is completely accessible. She has another album that, well, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. We're heading into the top 10 now, guys. My top 10 favorite records of the decade. So, and we're already at half an hour. So this is an epic video, as I was suggesting it might be. Number 10, my favorite band of the moment, and have been for probably the past decade or even 2 decades, the Brian Jonestown Massacre. They also released about 5,000 records this year, or this decade. This is my favorite, Revelation. In many ways, it's kind of going back to basics because Anton kind of took a turn to sort of electronic styles, which were also very successful. But this here is his kind of return to form, but it's still, you know, it's still got those flourishes, those electronic flourishes throughout. Brian Jonestown Massacre, you know them. Psych rock, experimental psych rock. Revelation is the name of this album, which came out in 2014. And it's my number 10 album of the decade. My number 9 album of the decade is another band that returned to form, so to speak. Godspeed You Black Emperor. Post-rock. And the album is called Alleluia Don't Bend, Ascend. They had been away for a while, so when they came back, you never know what to expect with a comeback record, but they did it with this one. They came back with a vengeance, and this is just beautiful, beautiful post-rock. You know what they sound like. It doesn't quite reach the heights of their most acclaimed pieces, but you know. And it comes with this this fold-out sort of poster that you know, that makes no sense at all, and that I'll never hang. Oh, and it comes with this 45 as well. So it's kind of, the album is kind of designed in a weird way. It's got 2 songs on the album and then 2 songs on this 45. But you are sort of, to get the full effect, you are supposed to really listen to this in a certain way. Anyways, it's all very confusing and pretentious, but awesome. And my 9th favorite album of the decade. Now for something completely different. My number 8 album of the decade is full-on post-punk with Savages. Silence Yourself is the name of the record. This came out of nowhere. It was the album we needed when we needed it. And it was like a punch in the face, but it was pure and authentic. Kind of like, you know, Susie and the Banshees meets Joy Division. It says right here, the album is to be played loud in the foreground. Actually, this tells you everything you need to know. In the liner notes, right before, it's like, okay, dialogue excerpt on the song Shut Up is from the film Opening Night by John Cassavetes. So you got like dialogue excerpt. Then, clarinet solo on Marshall Deers performed by Duke Garwood. And then, this album is to be played loud in the foreground. You got snippets from John Cassavetes movies, you got clarinet, and then you got loud, an album that needs to be played loud. Nice textured cover here too. Savages. Savages. Silence Yourself. Number 8. Number 7 is one of many albums released by this guy, Kurt Vile, and this is the record Bottle It In. This is his other albums. He released a couple of great albums. Waking in a Pretty Daze was great. I forget the name of the other album. Anyways, his stuff is all good, but this is the one that finally did it for me. Again, most consistent album. It contains a couple of really great long songs on here. This is, you know, indie folk with psych overtones. You know, it reminds me a bit of Neil Young, to be honest. Kind of like a jammy Neil Young, which Neil Young was kind of jammy himself. So, yeah, anyways. If any of the words in that description appeal to you, you might like this album. Kurt Vile. And the album is Bottle It In at number 6. So this is another album that flew under the radar for many, but I loved it. It was my favorite album of whenever it came out, 2015 I think, or something. 2016. It was the big comeback album by Yindi Halda. Again, post-rock. The album is called Under Summer. Their last album, the name of which escapes me right now, their only other album, is one of the great post-rock albums of all time, as far as I'm concerned. So when they came out of hiding and released this, I was really looking forward to it. This one has vocals, so I wasn't prepared for that, but it doesn't ruin the album. In fact, it still makes it great. In fact, it still makes it my 6th favorite album of the decade. So there you go. Under Summer by Yindi Halda at number 6. Number 5, we're getting Julia Holter again. And after I just kind of went on a thing about how she's still accessible even though she's weird, anybody who heard this album might disagree. But here it is, Aviary by Julia Holter. This one, her experimentation goes even further. May not be for everybody, but I think if you're a Kate Bush fan and you like when Kate Bush gets experimental, I think you'll dig this. It's an amazing, amazing record. Julia Holter's Aviary. Check it out at number 5, sorry. Sandro Perry, I told you we'd be talking about him again, and I did do a video on this. I remember that. This was my favorite album of last year. In Another Life. This is 2 songs basically. It's a hypnotic album. It's very mellow, but I guarantee if you're tired, it'll soothe you into a beautiful sleep. If you're not tired, it will just take you to another place. It is absolutely captivating. I don't know what you would describe this as. It's got ambient touches. It certainly dabbles in there's some electronic elements to it. If anybody checked this out after my recommendation last time, I know a couple people thought they might. Give it a listen. You know, not a lot of people know this album, but I have not met anybody yet who didn't like it. Yeah, I know people that people love this album, and it topped a lot of lists. It topped any list where somebody heard this album. It made the cut, put it that way. So it's you know, I'm not on my own with that one. Sandro Perry, he's from Toronto, but he's worked on international albums as well. Number 3 was another big comeback album. It was My Bloody Valentine. They finally came back after releasing Loveless, which is one of the greatest albums ever made. they came back with this, their third album entitled MBV. You know, it was understandably a disappointment to a lot of people because they're comparing it to Loveless. But, you know, everything's a disappointment if you're comparing it to Loveless. But I thought this was an awesome album. I revisit it often, and it holds up. It's amazing. It's pure shoegaze, pure My Bloody Valentine. I love it. Number 3 album of the decade. And then we get our top 2, which kind of come out of nowhere. If you saw Big Star 1000's video, this was his number 2 album as well. And it's another Toronto band, Bad Bad Not Good. Their third album, it's entitled 3. This is the first, they're a jazz trio from Toronto. But this kind of borrows from all kinds of different types of music. It's not just jazz. There's electronica, kind of hip-hop elements as well. Prior to this, their career was kind of focused on sort of jazz versions of hip-hop songs. But this is their first completely original album, and it works. And it doesn't get the love that it should. This should be on many more lists than just mine and Big Star 1000's. There should be a lot of people with this album up high. It's perfect. It's a perfect record. If you dig the jazz, do you like the jazz, kids? If you do, you'll dig this. And if you dig the jazz, you'll like my number 1 album as well. My favorite album of the decade came out, 2015? And it just occurred to me now how I have been providing spoilers for my number 1 album through this whole video. Kamasi Washington, The Epic. You know, that is, I swear that was not planned. That was not on purpose. I promise you that wasn't on purpose. The Epic, Kamasi Washington, number 1. It is epic. It's a 3-record set in a sturdy box. This is a jazz album that stands up next to the great jazz albums of the past. If I was to do a list of the greatest jazz records of all time, you'd have the classics there. You'd have your Coltrane, your Miles Davis, your Herbie Hancock, all those guys, and I guarantee this album would definitely be in the top 20, maybe even the top 10. It is that good. And it's my number 1 album of the decade. Kamasi Washington, The Epic. Check it out if you haven't. You know, again, at 3 records, it does require some patience, but I promise you won't be let down if you enjoy that kind of thing. So, wow. I am really happy with the way this video turned out. If you stayed for the full 42 minutes and 43 seconds so far, because that's a long time to listen to me yammer on without any preparation. But I used the word epic about 500 times in this video, and my number 1 album is called The Epic. That is crazy. It all comes together. Guys, it's been fun. Maybe you'll see me in the new year. Maybe you won't. I'll do, you know, we'll see how it goes. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Watch it in sections. Don't watch it all the way through. It'll give you a migraine, I promise you. And check out some of these bands. I'm sorry I didn't provide any samples or anything, but that's a lot of work. So yeah, hopefully something here speaks to you. My name is Bobby B. My channel is called Liner Notes. You can subscribe to it, but I don't put stuff up here very often. Subscribe to my my Instagram, The Vinyl Vagabond. I tend to post there a little more often. All right. See you in the new year, guys. Ciao.